I'm Andrea Scherner. I am the Sustainable Ag Facilitator and I work with the South Australian Arid Lands Landscape Board. The southern rangelands of Australia cover more than 4.3 million square kilometres. This is 54% of the Australian continent. Characterised by irregular climate patterns and low rainfall, the southern rangelands lie in country not commercially suitable for arable cropping and conventional agriculture. Australia's inland is incredibly diverse. The plants and animals that inhabit the rangelands have adapted unique physiological features to survive in extreme temperatures and with very little water. These plant communities include extensive mulga woodlands, open grasslands and ephemeral floodplains, salt lakes and chenopod shrublands. These extensive regions are prized for their value as grazing lands for sheep and cattle grazing, for their biodiversity, their mineral wealth and their cultural values. With some of the oldest and most weathered soils in the world, rangelands plant communities have adapted to tolerate low nutrients and high salt levels. The landscape patterns and plant communities that have formed over tens of thousands of years conserve and make effective use of what little moisture is available. When intact and working effectively, the patterns and groves, the runoff and run-on areas, trap and store water and nutrients at both micro and macro scales, enabling the diverse life that the rangelands support. In South Australia's arid lands region, many areas receive less than 200 mils of rainfall per year. So managing the landscape to make the most effective use of rainfall events is critical in ensuring the productivity and health of arid ecosystems into the future. In areas with a historic legacy of overgrazing, perennial vegetation has been removed or highly modified. Coupled with the new incisions in the landscape caused by roads, pipelines and animal tracks, pockets of country throughout the rangelands have literally had the plug pulled out. These are dehydrated landscapes that no longer function at their optimum. Restoring these areas by slowing surface flows, spreading water back out onto floodplains and increasing soil water infiltration is the focus of some of the work in this story.
My name's Eliza Duro and I'm from Mount Victor Station, about 72 k's northwest of Yunta. A woe buoy is a small bank to go across the road to get water to flow off. So with a lot of roads, if they're going away from the hill and you get the water falling off the hill, gets trapped on the road, and the woe buoy is designed to help that water get to the other side. So that stops the lower side from getting dehydrated even more. And in a lot of places you can actually see the difference where the high side will have way more vegetation than on the lower side. And then your roads get eroded, they get washed out, they make it really hard to travel down. You know, it's expensive on your vehicles, it's potentially dangerous in some spots.
I'm Lance Mudray. I work for the Malone Institute. I'm based in Wagen in Western Australia, which is about halfway between Perth and Albany. Yeah, I think, well, it's important to know what your soils are, regardless of landscape rehydration or whatever. Just knowing what they are, then you can get an idea of what sort of vegetation will grow in them and what carrying capacity you might have if you're running stock. It can give you hints into issues there might be, some things that inhibit growth, for instance, like low soil pH, acidity, or in some cases, particularly around here, is high soil pH, so high alkalinity. And then we can also use it as a measurement tool. So like if we take some samples and measure the soil, we did some slaking and dispersion tests, which is very simple. And that's really important in terms of the structural integrity of the soil. So it helps you tell whether you, firstly, if the soil's erodible or not, and the texture helps with that too. Secondly, you know, if you've got a dispersive soil, then it's going to be pretty difficult to build a structure with it because it's just highly erodible. So contours, they're basically a structure to disperse water and to try and spread it further. So they work through infiltration, so they fill up the channel of the contour. Basically, it's just a channel dug along a contour line. That channel fills up with water. On the ridges, we'll put spill points where water can spill out in sort of a moderate event, and that goes out on a ridge line, so the water actually disperses rather than concentrating. And by dispersing, the water depth gets lower, which means you get lower velocity and lower energy, so it's not going to erode. And then obviously we build in safety points, what we call a secondary sill for big flows, so that that can overflow and not damage the structure. But that's really a distribution feature, and often we'll put that above a series of head cuts to try and reduce the volume of water going over a head cut. And then that might be tied in with some protective measures on the head cut itself. And then down in the waterway, we might be putting in some in-stream structures to try and lift that water level. So it's an integrated process. We're not just using one thing at a time, we're using a whole series of different things, and it'll be a sequence of things, not just one intervention on its own. So we use a laser level. It's a simple tool, easy to use with one person, so that's one advantage of it. And we use that to firstly do a bit of an assessment so we can get some details of a site. So whether it's the slope in the channel or slope around the channel, we can get an idea of the shape and the size of the channel, so that we can calculate the capacity of that channel to take flow. So then we can work out sort of how much we need to build it up and so on. That's the first one, so assessment basically. And then secondly, we can use it to actually mark out a contour and get it on the contour. So it's quite critical to actually get it on the contour. And we can also use it to work out where we put our structures in stream. So we set out where the water banks up to the next structure, so we've got water going onto water from the second structure up. So the check banks, they were designed to try and, I guess, lengthen the flow path. They were across an area which the previous owners to the property had put in a pipeline from the bore down to a water point, and they'd done that, cut a V with a grader and then laid the pipe and then just backfilled it. And we measured the soil there and it was quite slaking, so quite erodible. And there were also a set of head cuts coming up from lower down the system on the creek. So that pipeline had also been used as a track, so that had eroded out in a gully. So they set these check banks up to try and disperse the water around the feature to make it go further and spread it out a bit more. So they were staggered sort of a bit like that. So it would come down that way and then down that way and then down that way sort of thing. Basically reducing the slope effectively, which is one of the key factors in erosion. Yeah, brickworks or brick banks. So they're basically very short contours, maybe 20 to 30 metres long. They don't necessarily need to be exactly on the contour, which makes them a little bit better because you don't need to be so exacting. And they're basically, if you look at them from above, like a series of bricks in a wall. So one there, one there, one there, one there, one there, and right across an area. And that particular area was a alluvial fan. So it's a alluvial being water depositional structure feature. So that feature would actually have reasonably good soils, but there's some small little rills and gullies working up its way up through that and basically dehydrating that system, and it was quite scalded, so pretty much except for the little gullies it was completely bare. And they were done in October last year. We were out there yesterday and could see quite an amount of vegetation growing around the swale bit, which is the little channel bits, and even on the banks, yeah, so they were really successful. So brush filters can be implemented in a lot of ways. Most basic is if you've got a small scalded area, what Tim's done out there is against the track is just put a coir log roll, stake that into the ground where the water sort of comes out onto the track, and then he's spread branches of whatever he's cut from nearby onto that area. Ideally, if you can use green stuff, so growing branches, so obviously ask the tree and don't take all of it, but you cut a few branches off, lay them down, and if you've got a live plant then it's going to drop the leaves. That's organic matter. Hopefully it's just seeded, so it's got berries or fruit or seeds or whatever on it, and that's going to drop down as well. And then you're creating a nice little niche for plants to grow, and you basically re-establish vegetation on an area. You get sort of next step up is you can use brush you can pack it into head cuts to stop that erosion undercut. You can use it as weirs, so you can brush pack into little gullies and creek lines and so on, and you can incorporate it into rolls like I described earlier. Yeah, so there's many things you can do with it. Well, it's important, I think, because then I think people have more of an understanding of their landscape and the natural functions of the landscape, and that's really critical. I think the natural functions can support what we do on the landscape. So whether you're a broadacre pastoral rangeland sort of raising cattle or sheep or whatever, or you're growing crops in southwest of WA where I'm from, or growing sheep in a more intensive broadacre system or whatever, the country can provide for you. And if you understand that, then it makes your operation so much easier. If we can be a little bit more modest and say, well, let's let nature do its thing,